University Place Council for Monday, June 1st, 2020 to order. As a reminder, we are conducting our meeting remotely in compliance with the special Open Public Meetings Act rules issued by Governor Inslee's emergency order. City Clerk, please do the roll call.
Councilmember Figueroa.
Present. Present.
Councilmember Keel.
Councilmember Keel is present.
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee.
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, present.
Councilmember McCluskey.
Councilmember McCluskey is here.
Councilmember Fleming. Mayor Pro Tem Worthington.
Mayor Pro Tem Worthington is here.
And Mayor Bleasy.
Mayor Belisi is here. Thank you. Before we begin our meeting, I would like to go over some special rules that we have for everyone in regards to our meeting. First is that there is no live public comment or public testimony for today. For the members of the public who are listening or joining us remotely, please recognize that you have had the opportunity and that the opportunity remains to submit your public comment via email. Comments received before the 5:30 deadline today will have been electronically provided to City Council for their consideration. Comments received after that deadline will also be provided electronically to the City Council after this meeting. Secondly, for City Council members, as with our previous remote meetings, we will continue to use the Red Robin method in the sequence showing in the speaking and voting chart our City Clerk has provided each of you to ensure orderliness of our meeting and that everyone has a chance to speak. And lastly, given the special circumstances, please also note that in the event of technical difficulty, all items on this agenda shall be carried over to the agenda for June 15th, 2020 regular meeting. With that, may I ask Councilmember Pro Tem Lee to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilmember Pro Tem Lee. With that, I'd like to call for a motion of the approval of the agenda.
I move the approval of the agenda for this evening.
I have a first. Do I have a second?
Councilmember Keel, I second.
Okay, I have a first and a second. Are there any motions or objections to the agenda as presented? Not hearing any. The motion for approval of the agenda passes unanimously. As of 5:30 this evening, there were no public comments that were received, so that portion of our agenda is moving on to our next agenda, the consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as submitted?
I move the approval of the consent agenda for June 1st, 2020. Steve Worthington, Mayor Pro Tem.
Do I have a second?
Councilmember Keel, I second.
Are there any objections to the consent agenda as submitted? Hearing none, the consent agenda passes unanimously. Thank you. At this time, we are on to the city manager report. Mr. Sugg.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and those that are watching this live broadcast. Two items, Mayor, for my tonight's city manager's report. First of all, to let everyone know, this Thursday from 1:30 to 4:30 in the afternoon, Pierce County will be doing a PPE distribution at 7 distribution sites in Pierce County. University Place is one of those 7 distribution points where businesses who are pre-approved will have certificates to allow pickups of their PPE. So what's very interesting about this is that Pierce County is going to be handing out in total across the county 1 million masks and 20,000 thermometers as part of their economic stabilization assistance. So we will be one of those sites, and businesses, those that pick up their PPE, it'll be in the vicinity of the old Windmill Village parking lot, which the cars will be looped through there. More to be known about that, but that's information for you this Thursday from 1:30 to 4:30. Businesses will be picking up PPE at our site. And then secondly, wanted to say a few words about the Safe Start program, which Governor Inslee today issued a proclamation as the Stay Home, Stay Healthy order, which he proclaimed earlier, is set to expire tonight at 11:59 p.m. That is being replaced with the new Safe Start program, which is the governor's plan for reopening the economy here in Washington State. Washington will move through the phased reopening county by county, allowing for flexibility and local control to address COVID-19 activity geographically. And effective June 1, counties may apply to the Secretary of Washington's State Department of Health to advance to the next phase. Applications will be evaluated by a county's ability to meet target metrics and will be considered holistically in their readiness and ability to respond. Now with that, this morning at a special meeting of the Pierce County Council, the County Council unanimously approved a resolution authorizing the submittal of an application to the Washington State Department of Health to proceed to phase 2 of the governor's Safe Start Recovery Plan. Moving to phase 2 will allow the county, allows recreation, business, and travel to restart with limitations. In adopting the resolution, the County Council accepted the recommendations and plan of the Tacoma-Pierce County Board of Health, which met yesterday and approved their resolution. So the County Executive Bruce Damemeyer will be submitting an application to the Washington State Department of Health. And that concludes my report, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sugg. At this time, we are using the round robin for council comments. Councilmember Figueroa, do you have any comments?
No, Mayor, thank you.
Councilmember Keel.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Keel. I just wanted to say this past week, in my role as chair of Sound Transit, and I hosted a meeting with 52 mayors in the Pierce, King, and Snohomish County area, and our mayor was there representing University Place, which I was very grateful for. And in that meeting, I spoke about the impact of the pandemic on Sound Transit and Sound Transit's ability to deliver all of our projects on the schedule that we originally set for ST3. We know that just like every city in every state across this nation, our budget has been impacted, particularly around sales tax. And so what we're doing now as a Sound Transit Board is coming together over the next few months, and we're calling it a realignment of the projects that we're going to deliver. And my guesstimation is that we're still planning to deliver all the projects that we have on board and that we promised, but we're thinking that the schedule is going to have to change due to the fact that the money that's coming in is not going to be on the same schedule that we had anticipated. So there's more to come, but I would encourage council members and citizens to be a part of the process and give us your feedback, because we're certainly going to be out looking for feedback. So thank you, Mayor. That's it for me.
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee.
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee. On May 28th, I participated in a entrance conference, remote conference with Mayor Pro Tem Worthington and several of our city staff members. It was chaired by the audit committee. We are going to have our annual audit sometime during the month of July. It hasn't been determined exactly when, but it will be during that month. They'll be looking at the records for January 1st, 2019 through December 31st, 2019. They will evaluate accounts payable, electronic funds transfers, financial condition of the city, compliance with service terms, contract compliance, cash receipting and deposit timeliness, and accounts receivable, collection of cellular utility taxes. At the they're also looking at a federal grant compliance audit, which is required for the year 2019, and they will look at one program, which is the Highway Planning and Construction Cluster 20.205. They will give an overall evaluation of our financial situation and make a report. It will cost approximately $62,900 plus travel expenses. They don't expect there will be that much in travel since this will be done remotely, but there may be some. Also, there's a second audit, which actually this will be the last year. It has to do with the University Place Town Center Project Authority. This will be the last year that this is audited because the city, when they refinanced that debt, it is now carried by the city. And so that will be included next year in the normal annual audit. That also has a cost of $12,400 plus travel expenses. And once again, that will be done remotely. They don't expect that they'll be using much of that travel money, but it could happen. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Councilmember Pro Tem Lee. Councilmember McCluskey, do you have any comments?
Councilmember McCluskey, I don't have any comments at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Has Councilmember Fleming managed to get online? Okay, not hearing anything. I'll go to Mayor Pro Tem Worthington. Do you have any comments at this time?
Mayor Pro Tem Worthington. And actually, no, I don't have any comments either this evening. Just wish everyone a good couple of weeks to come forward.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Worthington. I actually don't have any comments. I think Councilmember Keel covered very well the webinar or the Zoom meeting that we had on the dire financial situation that Sound Transit is facing this year as well as going into the future. And I do really encourage our citizens as well as our council members to stay engaged in this process as they will be doing some extensive outreach and education on their plans and what the future is going to hold for transit in general based on our current economic situation. I would like to kind of highlight a positive that happened here while we were in this nice little stay-at-home thing. I received an email from staff here, about a month ago, about one of our citizens that has graciously donated some of his stimulus money that he received. He is an avid supporter of the city, but he is also one of our economic development commissioners. In fact, he is our co-chair of the Economic Development Commission. And I was extremely proud to be able to count this individual as a friend and a confidant. And I'm sure each of you has seen the Facebook post that the city has put out there to acknowledge the receipt of the funds that he has so graciously donated, not only to the city, but to other nonprofits throughout the area. And so I wanted to publicly thank Mr. Chuck Foster. One of the reasons I waited to this time is he is going to be listening to a presentation that we have later on this evening. And so I wanted to publicly acknowledge his gracious gift and to thank him for his consideration. And I know that staff will be putting those funds to good use, and will seek his direction for how he would like to see those funds best spent. On another note, it is our finance committee time. Usually every quarter we have a finance committee meeting. It was originally slated to be this evening. However, there's, as you know, in this wonderful digital age, it's a lot more problematic to get people together. So I'm hoping that all of us council members would be able to meet at 5:30 on the 15th of June for a half-hour finance committee meeting. And what I'm asking you to do is to check your calendars within the next day or two and see if you would be able to come on board with a 5:30 meeting. And then we would adjourn at 6 o'clock to do our half-hour check-in prior to our regular council meeting. So if you are unable or have scheduling difficulties to meet up with that for the finance committee meeting of the whole on 5:30 on the 15th of June, please let us know as soon as possible. So if we don't have a majority, we could think of an alternate date to meet. So that is it for my input and council comments. At this time, we will move on to our next item, which is study session. This concerns the contract for the new alarm permitting program that the city is looking to institute here for our citizens and our businesses. And the person that I'm going to turn this meeting over to is the staff person and responsible for presenting the information is our Chief, Greg Primo. So, Chief, it is your show.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. It's good to see you all, even if it is virtually. Yes, tonight I'm talking about the alarm permit program that we have here in University Place, and it's operated by the police department. As you may know, under the University Place Municipal Code, all residences and businesses that operate a security alarm system are required to have it permitted by the city. This program has been put in place since incorporation. Originally, when the program was started, we utilized a computer software system that was developed and run by the Sheriff's Department, created by Pierce County. And because of the contract, we had just utilized that program. Several years ago, the Sheriff's Department had decided to venture away from utilizing that software system and have outsourced that program to a third-party vendor. University Place was able to continue using that software program that the county had created and maintained for us. In January, we were told that the county was no longer going to support that system any longer and had told us that we had about 12 months to try and find a new computer program for us to utilize. So we started kind of figuring out exactly what we needed to do, looked at different vendors. Since the county had outsourced the whole program, I talked with the county, the sheriff's department's alarm coordinator, as well as Lakewood Police Department's alarm coordinator to see about how they had outsourced it and how those things operated. And through those conversations, it was pretty clear that University Place is a smaller jurisdiction. The number of permits that we issue and compared to those probably wasn't a good fit for us. The amount of cost that it would incur, the cost savings of keeping it in-house was probably a better opportunity for us, as well as the level of service by having everything in-house. When citizens had questions, they were calling the police department for questions about the permits and that whole process versus completely outsourcing all of that. So we looked at the software programs that were available, consulted obviously with the city's IT department, and we reviewed a company called GovPilot that has several modules that they create for government specific use around all different types of areas within government. So they specifically have an alarm permitting program. We demoed that system with them. This system allows the user, so the citizen or the business owner, to actually do their permits online versus having to do it by paper and mailing it in or dropping it off here at the office. It also allows us to have access, so other departments to have access to that information. So it's not just the police department, the finance department can go into that system and see if the person is paid for their fines or fees or whatever the status is, or who owns that permit, those types of questions. There's unlimited users, so there isn't a limit on that piece. So we like that feature as well. During that, that contract with GovPilot, we were able to negotiate a contract that allowed us for what's called 5 modules. So there's the alarm permitting for security systems, as well as we can utilize 4 other modules that they have. And right now we're excited to be able to transfer our animal licensing as well over to that system. And then we'll explore the other 3 that are available, because when they sell these contracts, there's either 1 or the next one will be 5. So we decided to go with the 5 module program so we can utilize some of the other services. That annual cost is $16,668. So I know there's probably a few questions about the alarm program, and I'm going to go through some of those questions, and then at the end, if I didn't cover those, of course, we'll open it up for some additional. The first question, why do we have an alarm program? So first, most cities, like I said, we've had one since incorporation for 25 years now. It's very common that cities, police departments have an alarm program, permit program. The goal is to reduce the number of false alarms. That certainly is our goal. And we do this through tracking what alarms are out there. So when the officers are responding to alarms, we know whose it is. We know how to contact that person if there are issues with that alarm, and help educate them through the permitting process on proper utilization and the importance of maintaining that alarm system to avoid these false alarms. How many alarms do we have? Currently, we have about 3,000 active permits in University Place, and we respond to about 400 false alarms in a year. That's one of the challenges that we have with saying we have about 3,000 permits, because currently we only require the permit to be obtained once in a lifetime. So once that person applies for an alarm permit, we never know if they move, if they've transferred and sold their house to somebody else. We just kind of end up adding permits to our system. So what we have to do with staff time is occasionally go through that list, look at the assessor's site, and try and compare to see if that person is still the owner of a property versus having an annual permit system where we're putting that kind of onus on the owner to tell us, yes, I still have an alarm, I still live here, and keep it permitted. Why do we charge for alarm permits? Well, there is a cost to the city for an alarm response. Obviously, there's a charge for the officer's time going to the call, but there's also a charge in terms of South Sound 911, so that call being processed and dispatched. There's the cost of the alarm program, staff time, mailings, the software systems that we're having to utilize. And so when a person decides or is required really to buy that permit, that is giving them the assurance that an officer is going to respond to their alarms when they're activated, whether a neighbor calls it in or if they have an alarm monitoring company that they utilize. So how does a non-response work is another question I get. So if a permit owner, well, I'll back up a little bit. The way we operate is that the alarm companies that operate within the city send us a list of new clients and customers that they obtain. That list has the name and address of where the new alarm is at. So we send that person a notice saying, please permit your alarm, and here's the application process. If that person does not file for a permit and pay their fee, then that address goes onto a non-response list. And so in dispatch, when that phone call comes in and says this house's alarm is going off, if they did not permit it, then we do not respond to that call. The same thing goes for a house, let's say that they're not a monitored system, but the neighbor calls in 911 that their neighbor's house's alarm is going off. And so we respond out there because we will, it's not on our list yet as being a non-response. Once we get there, we determine, oh, they don't have a permit. The officers will handle the call, submit that information to our office, who will then send that homeowner the permit information, requesting them to complete it and pay for their permit. If they then decline to do that, they don't respond in any way, then that address gets added to our non-response list. What kind of information is obtained and who has the access? Really, the alarm system or permit process really obtains just basic contact information, address, the alarm company, contact information for the homeowners, contact information for any emergency contacts that they might have, and then information on the alarm itself in terms of what it covers, who's the alarm company, and those types of things. Like I said before, this new system allows us to have staff employees from other departments have access to this information. So since finance handles the invoices and the billing, they would be able to have access to review that data that's in there. The permit desk upstairs would also have access to that information, but it is only accessed by city staff members. So why an annual fee? I talked a little bit about that already. Again, it's to ensure that the program costs are fully covered. This allows us to keep accurate records of alarms in the city, and I talked about that in regards to people moving away and not updating our records so we know who has an active permit. It also reinforces that need for maintaining their systems to avoid false alarms in the future. Currently, we do a $23 one-time fee, and we're proposing a move to a $25 annual fee. So if we're doing the proposed annual fee, we're estimating we would get about $75,000 in annual revenue from that, which would be covering all of the costs associated. Currently, with our one-time fee and the limited false alarm fees, our revenue is right around $9,500 a year. How are our false alarm fees assessed and then who processes? So currently, our false alarm fees are a tiered system. Right now, we do a first time is the free. You had a false alarm, we had officers respond, they did all their investigation. There's no charge for that. Then the next time you have one, you're charged $57.50. If you get a third one, you're charged $86.25. And then if you get a fourth one, it's at $115. That goes for every 6 months, and then it starts all over again after 6 months. It's, we're proposing that there would be a change to that, and that we just went to a $75 flat fee for each false alarm. As you can see with that system, it takes a lot more tracking. Systems start over in terms of that 6 month time window. Plus, we feel that if you just made a $75 flat fee for every false alarm, people might pay a little bit more attention to doing a better job of keeping track of their alarm system versus I know I have a free one. We'll just take care of it. You know, we'll deal with the alarm after I get that free one type of thing. So currently the system, the officers respond to the call. We get those reports on a weekly basis of all the false alarms. They're processed in our office, and then the paperwork is sent up to finance for the invoice. So basically we create the invoice. Hey, there was a false alarm fee. It's sent up to finance and they handle all the billing and tracking of those payments. In my last question I had here that I'll share is how we will notify alarm users of the proposed changes. So all of the fees and all of those types of changes are obviously going to be more of a code thing that we'll talk about in a future meeting. Right now we're just talking about the contract itself for the software, but if we make any proposed changes related to those fees and whatnot, the idea is we'll send out a mailer to everybody that has an alarm permit currently explaining the changes that will be coming in 2021. And in everybody that even there was a one-time registration permit, they still had a date that they applied for it. So the idea was if way back even 3 years ago I applied in March, well in March of 2021 will be your time that we will send you an invoice. So it's not going to be everybody in January is expected to pay. We will be mailing out invoices relative to when they originally applied for their permits. And then of course, any new permits that come in, they would just be asked to pay that fee when they apply. So that is everything that I had prepared to cover. Certainly open to any questions that I didn't cover in the conversation.
Well, thank you, Chief, for your report. At this time, it is open for council comments. Councilmember Figueroa, do you have any comments or questions of Chief Primo?
Yes, yes, this is Councilman Figueroa. Chief, just a little bit, if we can back up just a little bit, when it kicks off in January, the new permittees will start off with the $75. But you said something about if I can rephrase what you said, the ones with 3 years back or the previous ones, I wasn't clear on that. And the way I heard it is that if somebody 3 years or 5 years or 8 years ago, they wouldn't necessarily be paying $75. Let's say their alarm went off in January the 2nd or the 15th or whatever. They wouldn't necessarily be paying $75, and they wouldn't start fresh from the like everybody else. That's maybe is a new applicant. Is that correct?
So just to clarify, so the $75 fee is just for a false alarm. So starting in January, if there was anybody who got a false alarm, they would get a fee of $75. We would send them an invoice for that response. The permit, which is separate from the false alarm, the permit would go in effect in January, and that would be for everybody who has an alarm system in University Place. They would pay a $25 fee just to have that alarm for us to respond to. And that $25 wouldn't necessarily be due in January. We would send them an invoice.
So, Mayor, so what about for those that supposedly think they have a lifetime permit?
Right. Okay, we're back to me. Yeah, I think that's the idea is we're going to try and educate people that we're going to an annual permit. I don't know if we've ever called it a lifetime permit. We've called it a one-time permit, and they had to pay for it. But in that, the idea is in November, December, we send out a mailer to everybody saying that the city is now going to an annual permit, and that they will receive that $25 invoice at some point during 2021, whenever their kind of renewal date is from the city.
Mayor, thank you, and Chief, thank you for your presentation.
Councilmember Keel, do you have any questions?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. And Chief, thanks for your presentation as well. I am one of those lifetime / one-time alarm owners, and it's good, to hear what we're doing. First of all, I think it'd be very important to be clear to everyone that we're doing this because the original provider of the alarm system has gotten out of that business. I think that's going to be a very important point that we make clear to folks, because if they've got some other complaints or criticisms or other things about, well, why are we doing this? I thought I had a lifetime, this and that, and they're coming to us with that. I think we need to be clear. It's like, wait a minute, the person that sold you that lifetime is the one that got out of business. We're here to clean up the mess, okay, or the piece that's off. So I think that we need to really kind of help with that. Number one. The second thing is that when you said that if a person hasn't paid and they're on the list that they haven't paid for the thing, and then the alarm goes off, that we wouldn't respond. I'm getting a little queasy about that, but what if they picked up the phone and dialed 911? Would you respond to that? And then if yes, what's the difference between a call for help? I mean, a call for help is a call for help. And yeah, so if my house alarm is going off, I mean, we don't know if it's false or not false. And if I'm the one with my alarm going off, I'm like, dude, get here and help me figure it out. Don't not come. So, that's my question. How do you reconcile that scenario?
Yeah, so first part to talk about the fee, the annual fee. You're right, we kind of inherited this program. So when incorporation happened, University Place just kind of inherited the county program, which at the time was a one-time fee. The database, the system that we used was the sheriff's departments that was used before the town was incorporated. And like I said, the sheriff's department has gone to an annual fee. So if you're living in an unincorporated Pierce County, you're paying an annual fee now. They changed that several years ago, even though way back in 1995, it was a one-time fee. So we're, in a way, that piece is we're getting kind of along our partners, along our neighbors. We're starting to get consistent in regards to the size of the city that we are. So the second piece or second question that you had was about responding. This is only for alarm calls. So if an alarm company calls us or a neighbor calls and says, hey, my neighbor's house alarm is going off, that's an alarm call. If you call and say, I'm in my house and my alarm is going off, I think somebody's breaking in, that we're coming to that call, because that's not an alarm call. That's a security check or a burglary in progress, because you're actually home. There's no reason for it to be going off false. The false alarms tend to be when you're gone, your dog set it off, or you left the door ajar and set the alarm and ran off. So they're two different types of calls. So yeah, we would not disregard because you're on the non-response for an alarm call. Those are different. We would still respond to that.
Okay. You're muted. Councilmember Keel, are you finished with your comments?
I am. Thank you. That was clear. I appreciate it. And thanks for telling me I was muted.
Okay. Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, do you have any comments or questions?
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee. Yes, Chief, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned pet permits or animal permits, and then you didn't expound on it. Is that going to be in the program?
Yeah, I was using that as an example because the software, this contract that we're proposing allows us 5 different modules from this company. And one of those modules that we can use is the animal licensing program, and that we internally would like to go to that as well. So I was just using that as an example. If we have access to 5, we want to use it for the alarm program, and the animal licensing is another one that we're going to use it for. We still have 3 others that we can look at all of their different modules to see where else in the city we might be able to utilize them.
Thank you. It would be nice as a pet owner to be able to pay that on the internet. That's not currently the way it's done, but that would make it easier. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you.
Councilmember McCluskey, do you have any comments or questions? You are muted, ma'am. Councilmember
there it
McCluskey,
is.
there you go.
All right, I was trying to find my mouse. It ran after the cheese. So thank you, Chief, for your report. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I like the upgrades to the software program for online services and pet licensing. What other type modules does the software program have? And when you add the modules, is that going to increase the cost? I know you said with the pet licensing, the cost probably would stay the same at $16,000 and $668.
Yeah, so under the 16,668, we have the 5 modules access to. The only 2 that I've personally looked at were the animal licensing and the alarm permitting, because those would be a police department area that we would utilize. I know that they have modules for all different types of permitting in terms of building permits and other public works type related functions that will be for somebody else to review and see if that'll work in their area.
Right, I get it. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And do we have currently permitted any apartment complexes or condo complexes? Or is this more mainly for individual residences?
Yeah, that I don't know if we have a specific, it's pretty much open to anybody that operates an alarm system. So it's businesses, it's individual houses, individual apartments. Not a lot of apartments tend to be equipped, but a office at an apartment complex, yeah, those tend to have alarms and they will be a customer of ours. Yeah. But usually individual apartments, there's not a lot that have alarm systems. They might have their own camera system or something like that they utilize, which are not a part of that. It's only for audible alarms, that security type systems.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right, thank you. Well, it does sound like a great software program to go with GovPilot and to include the pet licensing as well, to get that up, and so we can help monitor and track them as well more efficiently than we have done in the past. So at this time, I don't have any more questions for you. Thank you again for your time and your innovation.
I understand Councilmember Fleming has signed in. Do you have any questions concerning the new alarm permit program? I believe he's still having issues. So with that, I will go with Mayor Pro Tem Worthington. Do you have any comments or questions?
Thank you, Mayor Bellisi. I do have a few questions and perhaps a comment as well. First off, Chief, thank you for the information. Very helpful for us to take a look at this. And it sounds like it's a promising program in a couple of different ways. I wanted to clarify this two-part questions. First part of which is I wanted to clarify, do we do commercial alarm monitoring? So think of that first. And then the other part of this is when the alarm goes off in someone's home, what are our steps? Who calls us? How do we know? And maybe the third part of that question, and if we didn't do it, who would do it?
So the first question was commercial alarm monitoring. And I'm in terms of monitoring, we don't do any type of monitoring of alarms. We do respond to commercial alarms. So if any type of business, a storage facility, a big box store, whatever has an alarm system, their alarm company call us when they have an activation, and we respond to those calls. So, and then the process, yeah, whether it's the alarm company that calls 911 and says, hey, this is ADT security, we have an alarm activation at such and such an address, this is what zones are going off. They're supposed to have called the homeowner to verify that it is not a false alarm, that there's something going on, or if they can't get a hold of the owner, then they're calling the local dispatch center for where the person lives. And then we're just dispatching 2 officers out to respond to that call. And now I'm trying to remember what your third question was, and
If we didn't do it, who would?
No one. I've heard of one jurisdiction in another state that they created a city ordinance that said, if you want to operate an alarm system and be an alarm monitoring company, that you need to supply the security guards to respond to those alarms, and that it was upon them to then dispatch that security officer out, who then verifies whether or not it's a false alarm or if it's a real alarm. But outside of that, we are the ones that would respond to those calls.
And I have a couple of others, but one of which, in terms of the other questions, are you had mentioned we have approximately 3,000 subscribers, people that are signed up rather for their one-time fee. I have the impression that some of those may not in fact be currently active. And I guess that's a question that I had is it really 3,000 or some number that's a bit less or maybe a lot less? And I think that maybe I have a comment after that.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Chief.
I'll go ahead and answer that one. Yeah, so when the county notified us in January that we were going to need to start looking for new software, part of our process was trying to figure out exactly how many alarm permits we had, because that was one of the challenges. Is if we just looked at the system, it told us we had roughly 5,000, but we knew that a lot of those people, they were really old permits, from 10, 20 years ago. So like I said, our office manager has been going in to the county assessor site and seeing if that name still matches the address. Sometimes she sends a snail mail out to them and says, hey, do you still live at this address? We just want to verify our records for your alarm permit. And so, to the best of our knowledge, after going through and eliminating a lot of places that the names don't match up between the permit and the current homeowner listed on the assessor site, we've got that number down closer to 3,000. It might be, again, that's as close as guess as we can get. I don't think it's going to go much below that.
Okay. Good. And I had a follow-up comment, which is 2 things now. Great, good to know. I'm glad to hear that when we say 3,000, we've had a chance to comb out things that aren't there and if we look at offsetting revenue for the expense and the rest of the things, chances are we're going to be close to those targets. We recognize it's an estimate, not exactly perfect, but okay, great. We're going to be in that ballpark. That's reassuring. The other thing is, while this is new for us to charge an annual fee, it's not new for the county, nor is it new for cities around us. It's a pretty typical annual fee issue, and it seems like a service that some folks will be using and paying for. And while the majority of people, the other 7,000 or more households in the community, won't be using it, is it fair for them to carry the cost through their taxes? And so that's one of the ways I'm looking at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I want to thank you, Chief, for your excellent presentation and the depth in which you covered the information. I currently have no questions or comments. As is standard, I do know that we can go through the Q&A process again, the seating chart process. I do see that Councilmember Fleming is finally with us in the world of technology. And I'm going to defer to you, ask if you have any comments or questions regarding the new alarm permit program. I know you were not here for the presentation, but you did have your reading material. So do you have any questions or comments at this time? You are muted, sir.
How's that? Thank you, Madam Mayor. And with this wonderful technology, I'm glad I'm finally able to see, well, I could see you from the beginning, but you couldn't see me or hear me. You know, I did have the reading material and I got a wonderful briefing by the staff on this particular topic. And as I shared with them, and I'll share with council, I understand the importance for having this, the alarm systems brought up to date in terms of what we have in the community. I still have some great reservations with regards to an annual fee. I appreciate everything the chief has said with regards to it, but I still need to process that a little bit more before I can be completely on board with an annual fee for that. You know, University Place is a unique city. I appreciate what Councilmember Worthington said about, you know, this is what they do in the county, so go the county, so go the city. I respectfully disagree with that, but it's still something I just need to process a little further. So thank you for allowing me to comment on that.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Fleming. From the comments received from the majority of the council members, I kind of gathered that there were no additional follow-up questions, but I will open it up, go through a second round, as I understand that Councilmember Figueroa has indicated he has some additional comments or questions. So Councilmember Figueroa.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Figueroa. Chief, on back to the pet alarm module. If you activated that module, will we have to, I think we have a contract with Pierce County for our pet licensing process, or will we be able to get rid of that process, and because we pay for that, and go to this process? That's question number one. Question number two would be on the commercial end. I understand what you said, but what wasn't clear to me is if there's a false alarm with a business, do they pay like the residents do? Thank you.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, I'll start with the commercial one again. Yes, they pay just like a resident would. They pay for their permit annually. They'll pay for any false alarms that they incur. So they're charged just equally as a resident would. On the animal licensing, we do have a contract with Pierce County for animal control, but all animal licensing and permitting is done in the city of University Place. It's so this would just, we already have a system that we do utilize. This would allow us to be on the same system as the alarm permitting program. So we might be able to reduce the number of entries that a citizen might have to enter if they're doing both alarm permit and and their animal licensing. So, but yes, we do licensing in-house.
Okay, get one more, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. One more thing, because Councilman Fleming mentioned about the one-time annual fee. He wasn't here for your presentation, but I just want to clarify for Councilmember Fleming, and that is there is no one's proposing, the chief is not proposing, or staff to have an annual fee. This will be, excuse me, a lifetime. I'm sure, excuse me, it was an annual fee, and I wasn't clear about if you were talking about the one-time fee that we had before or an actual 1-year annual fee, and I wanted to clarify that. I wasn't sure exactly what you were debating. So this is for Councilmember Fleming, if I may.
Is it? I think the question was for Councilmember Fleming, but I'll be happy to answer for it.
Oh, no, I don't know if I'm on or not, but thank you, Mayor. Now I'm on. You know, up until now, we've had a one-time registration fee. If I understood the briefing I got on this, this is moving from a one-time registration fee to an annual fee.
Right.
So that's a change. So I am having reservations about an annual fee. The one-time registration fee, I have no issues with that, but moving it to an annual fee, I have concerns. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I'm not sure if he's coming back to me.
She's muted.
Mayor, you're muted.
So Councilmember Figueroa, did you have any additional questions?
Yes, comment.
Okay.
Yes, thank you again, Chief, and I do support the annual fee. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. As this is a study session, this will be on for consideration at a later agenda, at a later meeting on our agenda. So we will have an opportunity to discuss and ask other questions at that time. I always do encourage you, if you do come up with questions between now and the next time it's on for consideration, that you forward your questions and comments to staff so that we can have the research done in advance. With that, we're moving on to our next and most meaty subject that we've had to deal with since we've been conducting our meetings remotely, and that has to do with the CARES Act relief funds. I would like to remind our council members as we go through this process that what we are talking about this evening and studying this evening is the high level 30,000 foot level of the CARES Act funding. We are not getting into the weeds to discuss how funds are to be spent, etc. So staff is providing an overview of what is allowed and isn't allowed for the relief funding. We are providing directions to staff to move this item forward because we are under a tight time limit, as you will be reminded of during this presentation, to get these funds spent before October 31. So with that, I am going to turn this over to our staff for their presentation. I encourage you to keep detailed notes. I'm sure we'll have multiple rounds of questions and answers as we move forward this evening. With that, Mr. Sugg.
Thank you, Mayor, and members of the council and those that are watching this council meeting. Yes, the CARES program. We wanted to talk to you tonight about that, the CARES funding that the city received. Its letter awarding the city $992,700 in CARES funding. Well, what is CARES? CARES is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which was passed by Congress on March 27th of this year. The purpose of the act was to assist in the devastating financial impacts of the COVID-19 virus $150 billion relief fund was allocated by the federal government for states, local, and tribal governments. The state of Washington received $3 billion, almost $3 billion in funding from the CARES Act. Out of that, city and county governments with a population exceeding 500,000 received direct funding. And of course, Pierce County is a population exceeds 500,000, so it received $158 million. However, local cities such as ours, which are significantly under the 500,000 population mark, did not receive direct funding. Rather, the funding, a portion of the funding that the state got has been set aside in the amount of $300 million for distribution to cities and counties across the state that are under the 500,000 population. And they've distributed it based on population. Our share, again, is $992,700, which we received in an award letter on May 20th from the Department of Commerce. And they've given us a state contract, a draft of a state contract, which is included in the materials that we provided you this evening. We're going to be working and bringing back a contract, hopefully for council approval at the next meeting, if it's ready. We'll be working with the state on that. Furthermore, wanted to talk a little bit about, before I turn it over to Eric Faison, our Assistant City Manager, who's going to talk to you about expenditures. The CARES Act has an expenditure deadline of December 30th. However, the state will only reimburse expenditures incurred by local governments through October 31st. So why don't we have until December 30th? Well, the state needs enough time to process invoices so that they can expend any unspent funds by the December 30th date. So our deadline for spending these funds is October 31. It's a rather short time. It's an aggressive program. And we want to take you through the various options that have been developed at the staff level, and we hope to get council input tonight on next steps. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Assistant City Manager Eric Faison, and he'll take you through the next part on allowable expenditures.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council, Mayor Pro Tem. Basically, the CARES Act has 3 criteria in terms of expenditures. So it's not very broad or very limiting just from that standpoint. Basically, the expenditures have to be necessary and related, incurred in response to the COVID-19 health emergency. They must, as the City Manager Sugg mentioned, be incurred between March 1st and December 30th, but in our case, October 31st. And they must not, the expenditures must not have been accounted for in the budget that was approved as of March 27th, 2020. So those are pretty broad criteria. So we've gotten some guidance from both the state as well as the U.S. Department of Treasury on exactly what some of these things mean. For example, necessary has been interpreted very broadly, and it's basically as you as council define as being necessary. So whatever resolution that creates this program that we're going to develop, we'll make sure that we clarify what is considered necessary. The other one, obviously the date limitations aren't controversial and don't need explanation, but I guess they provided a little bit of guidance as it relates to whether the expense existed within the most recently passed budget. And for that, because there are examples where you may have provided within your budget expenses to provide public safety or to pay for a particular employee's time, but now that employee is doing a substantially different task related to response to this health emergency. And our human resources manager and Jennifer Hales are good examples of that. They've spent a substantial amount of time dedicated to this COVID-19 response. So what the U.S. Treasury has said is if the time for those employees are now dedicated to a substantially different purpose, then that time is reimbursable. So so they've divided up kind of within their guidance different examples of expenses that can be reimbursed to city expenses and what we define as human services and economic development. And so as it relates to, and if we can be on the, sorry, hold on, make sure I'm on the right slide. I apologize for the delay. So as it relates to city expenses, I've already mentioned the payroll and benefit expenses that can be reimbursed. We're allowed to be reimbursed for telework capabilities for public employees. For example, City Hall is closed, we've sent everyone home, but we're still doing the public's work from home. So providing employees with laptops, making sure that they have all the IT, both hardware and software capabilities to continue to provide work, all those expenses are reimbursable. Expenses that we incur to communicate to the public or to enforce public health orders. And this is particularly applicable in the public safety area, but also as it relates to our communications team and the work that they do. The purchase of medical and protective supplies, including sanitizing products and PPE for employees or for the public, is reimbursable. The disinfection of public areas and other facilities, those sorts of things, such as our playgrounds. When we've allowed people back in the parks, we have to clean the playground regularly so that we're making sure that it is clean for the public. So those are examples of city expenses that are reimbursable. There are also what we've called human services, and examples of that could be payments to provide emergency financial assistance to individuals or families who are impacted, particularly with the loss of income due to COVID-19. Programs to assist with the payment of mortgages or rent so people can avoid eviction or foreclosure. Within economic development, it's pretty broad. We're allowed to provide assistance and grants to businesses to reimburse them for business interruption if their business was required to be closed by the governor's order, or if they voluntarily closed to promote social distancing measures, or just to provide payroll support as the federal government has done through some of their programs. So as of now, we have identified over $100,000 through May of qualifying reimbursable city expenses related to personnel and material costs in responding to this emergency. Public safety has also identified approximately $85,000 to $100,000 in expenses they would anticipate would be reimbursable through this pandemic. And then we are preliminarily estimating there's an additional $290,000 in qualifying city expenses that mainly relate to hardware and software costs, consultant and staff support to implement some of the enhanced remote work and remote public access to city services, as well as costs that we would anticipate incurring when we reopen our public facilities in terms of sanitation and public health mitigation strategies. So if we can go to the next slide. We believe that there are a number of important policy questions that we would like council guidance on as we develop a program. We think that these guidance that you could provide to us would help expedite this entire process through your conversation here. Ultimately, you will be approving the program probably next month, but in developing that program, some of the conversations that you have here tonight could be helpful. The first question is kind of like, if we have funds available, how do you want to expend those funds, particularly as it relates to businesses and assistance to address human services needs? there's broad discretion, as I indicated before, on how you could provide assistance. But as a percentage, do you want to dedicate 100% of the available non-city expense funds to businesses, or do you want to divide that in some particular fashion between businesses and residents? If you approve it towards each or both, how much goes to each? 50-50, is it 75-25, any percentage that you might come up with. As it relates to human service needs, as I talked about earlier, there's a range of types of ways you could provide that assistance, rental assistance, mortgage assistance, childcare. Some jurisdictions are providing childcare to residents as they return to work, food bank assistance. And as it relates to businesses, do you want to focus on brick and mortar businesses, or are home-based businesses also going to be eligible? And then, you could establish a number of eligibility requirements as it relates to businesses. We assume that you will want it to be businesses that are current business license holders in UP, but there are other criteria you could consider, such as their tax revenue history. Is it a business that generates sales tax to the city, for example, because we don't have a B&O tax in University Place? Do you want to focus on businesses that only have a certain number of employees? For example, do you want to limit it to no more than 25 employees, 10 employees? Do you want to include the owner as an employee, etc.? And then also you can consider things like, how long has the business been in UP, and do they have multiple locations, some in UP, some not? And then lastly, as a policy question that we're looking at, how important is it to you that we have that the business had an opportunity to receive funds from other sources? For example, you can look at this as strengthening businesses that are successful and stable. If they've already received funding from other sources, we would add ours to that to help strengthen that business. Or do you want to say that those businesses have opportunities to receive money from other sources? We want to focus our program on businesses that have not had that opportunity. So you can see there's a range of process questions to be followed up with the next slide, which is our range of, so those were policy questions. There's the next slide of process questions, which are kind of, we can take this, we think that the intent of this program is to move quickly. And under option 1, we believe we can move relatively quickly, which is basically have council direct the city manager to develop the program. And then we do so with the advice of council and the Economic Development Commission. So we would have ad hoc, smaller meetings, not constituting a quorum. So multiple meetings over this next month with 3 members of council, 3 members of Economic Development Commission, inviting basically all members of council over this month period, and the Economic Development Commission to have their input in what the program looks like. And then we would bring that final program to council for your approval on July 6th, and with an attempt to distribute all the funds by the end of July. An alternative process would be under option 2, which would be council establishes a formal committee, and that committee could be members of the council and Economic Development Commission, but it could include others. It being a formal committee, all those committee meetings would be a formal body that would require public notice and public meetings where the public has access to the meetings. That would be a more involved process, so we wouldn't anticipate being able to bring back the recommendation until July 20th, with the anticipated distribution of funds at the end of August. So we're going to come back to both of these topics, but right now I'll turn it over to Jennifer Hales, who can start to talk about some of the human services needs.
Thank you, Eric. I'm hopeful that you can just move it to the next slide. Thank you. So in doing some research on human services that are provided, service providers in the city of University Place, there are two that operate within the city limits. That is Family Unlimited Network and Community Connections. There's two that operate outside the city that provide services to residents in our city while also providing services to residents outside our city. Those are Emergency Food Network and Catholic Community Services. And there are 11 human services providers that provide human services to the region. So within the city limits and to other residents within our region. And those services range from food, hygiene, provisions, housing, rides, all those things. So on the housing sector side, we were able to pull our rental community to get some sense of the COVID rental assistance needs. We had 22 plus multifamily housing complexes that were surveyed. And we had a total of 2,562 units that responded. So out of 22 of the multifamily housings responded and had 120 reported rental units that were not able to make their rent because of COVID-19. And so that's kind of some of the information that we've been trying to gather to look at sort of the needs within University Place at this point, because this is so rapidly moving and there's so many sources of funding that's coming out from different areas that we want to be sure that we're able to capture what the needs are in our city, human service needs. So I'm not sure if it goes back to Eric or Marisa.
Marisa.
Well, good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. Again, I'm Marisa Craig, Assistant City Manager. Very pleased to join you tonight for your first study on the CARES Relief Fund. Tonight, what I'd like to do is I'm going to give you a quick rundown of our local business profile. Then I'll provide you with a summary of the financial and other business assistance programs that I know some of our businesses have taken advantage of, and I'll give you kind of a status report of how many local businesses have taken advantage of that. And finally, at the end of my presentation, I will leave you with a quick look at what other jurisdictions are doing as they go through a similar process. They're in the same space you are tonight, kind of going through deliberation. So we'll go through, I think as you go through your policy questions, the various city thinking may provide some good insight. So with that, let me start with my first slide that is up here now. I'd like to give you, this is a business profile. And now you all know that we do a quarterly profile and have been doing so for a number of years now. I think we started in 2002, 2004. So through the years, we've been able to track the ups and downs of the number of our actual business licenses in UP. The reports have also given us a very good sense of what types of businesses we have, what specific business sectors are strong and dominates our local economy. We also track our terminated businesses, so we have those as well. So for the first quarter, as the slide indicates here, between January and March, we had a total of 1,530 licensed businesses. And you can see it's almost split evenly, 50-50. Storefront businesses, 767, home-based businesses, 763. It's a little bit ironic, actually, Council, that we got our I think, the best numbers we've had since we've been tracking between January and March, of course, just before the pandemic started. So I imagine that if we do this again next year, you can expect that the numbers will probably be, it's going to be a different story. So also, while I just wanted to point out as well that while the number of storefronts that you have there is just slightly more than our home-based businesses, this is too as a positive reflection of the increase in our commercial square footage from all the new construction and our mixed uses. And all of a sudden, as we've built new commercial spaces, lo and behold, we've gotten new businesses coming in. So Now, we've had the chance to talk to each one of you, I believe all of you, one-on-one last week. And based on the comments that I've received, and also just based on the priorities that I've heard from you, we decided to focus my comments on just storefront businesses with the highest business licenses. So you can see here the top 4 business sector focused on storefronts because that's what I heard you were most interested in. So you can see based on the 4, and then I added one because also I heard that there was great interest in the restaurants and food service. So you can see healthcare. If you looked at this 4 sectors, it's really not any surprise. Healthcare, of course, being the first one there. I think we're pretty much aware how attractive UP is. We always comment on how many medical and dental offices we have with the close proximity of the other medical facilities, the fact that we don't have a B&O tax, and our general demographics. It's really kind of an attractive place to be. And then we have the next highest business license holder, other services, and I made sure to put that down there. Automotive repair, the barber shops, or all our nail salons, dry cleaners, basically most of our service providers would probably be in that other service category. And then we have retail trade, of course, at 11.5%. And then professional, scientific, and technical services. Again, these are also service providers, but they're the legal services, accounting, bookkeeping services, architectural engineering, those sorts of businesses. And actually, I did include a more detailed attachment with the packet. And if you looked at that, really, it's the professional, scientific, and technical services that is, if you combined it with the home-based businesses, not just the storefront, is the highest category that we have in UP. So with the restaurants, I guess one insight I can share, Council, is that because we're going through something similar, one insight I can share is that following our 2008 and 2009 recession, we did see a surge in our home-based businesses. And I imagine that we will also begin to see probably a similar shift as the unemployment numbers ramp up and as industries begin to shed and permanently eliminate jobs. People will simply start to own their own business, open their own business, finding a way to replace their lost income. Perhaps maybe this is even more true with the sudden increase in people building up their capacity in home office. I know we've all done that. Certainly better technology and just changing perspective on how to do business. So next slide, please. Okay, so the next sort of information I'd like to share with you, Council, is since this started, there had been a number of assistance programs that had been available through the federal, state, local sources. And let me just quickly go through a few of them. I know you've all heard about the PPP and maybe the Idle. These are the federal programs that came directly from the 1.2 trillion stimulus funding. PPP and Idle loans are being administered by the SBA, and a lot of our businesses went through this. I'm sorry I couldn't get you numbers just are relevant just to UP because they don't have them. However, we do know that statewide, they offered there were about 91,000 business loans received and about 12 million, I believe, that had been granted. They were, and we have about 7 financial institutions, banks, and credit unions that had participated in this that are stationed in UP. So a lot of our business went through that. I hope that part of the 91,700 businesses that receive funding are some of our businesses. And I know there are because I've heard some anecdotal reports from some of our businesses that in fact they've received that. And then there is the state of Washington that they've actually asked the Associated Development Organizations. So in Pierce County, it was the EDB. This is a one-time grant of $10,000. It's not a loan. And this was a very, very competitive process. Each county was given a chunk of money based on population. So in Pierce County, we were allowed 145 applications to forward to the state. I'm very pleased that 7 of those were from University Place, considering how competitive the process was. And I think last Friday, I got word that out of the 7, 5 of your businesses were awarded funding. So that's good news, very good news. And then finally, Pierce County, through their economic development program, this is part of their $158 million that they've received. They have the emergency small business relief loan funds. That is primarily kind of a microloan program, forgivable loan. There were 24 businesses that have applied for that. I don't have word yet on whether all of them had received that. But I know that the staff at the Economic Development Department of Pierce County is really working hard at providing a lot of the technical assistance to ensure that a lot of them get that. And then as the city manager mentioned, they're also doing a lot of very practical business assistance like the PPE. That's they're basically giving masks and digital thermometers to all the businesses that had wanted it, as long as they're in Pierce County. So I will leave it at that. The next slide, please. And then finally, council, just as a conclusion, as what we've done is I just did some calling around our neighboring cities and area and other jurisdictions. I must say that they're in a similar state. While we've gotten some information from them, they too are going through deliberations on how to spend their relief funds. But I did think this was particularly interesting as you think about how we will make your allocation. So a lot of them, of course, are getting reimbursed, similar to what we're doing. But some of them are looking at human services assistance as well as business assistance and economic development assistance. You can see what they're looking at over here. While some of them are looking at even microloan programs, no interest loan programs for their economic development, business assistance, a lot of them are tending to veer towards more of the grants, just because of the challenges with administering the loans. So maybe that's a little bit of a help. And I also want to add that another key component that they're thinking about here is that they're really, a lot of them are partnering with nonprofits to help administer either the distribution of funds, the vetting of applications, and just the allocation. So with that, I think I will conclude my remarks, and I'll be glad to answer questions.
Okay, I understand that staff presentation is complete at this time.
Yes, Mayor.
Okay. All right, as the staff presentation is over, I would request, however, that we get slide number 3 regarding policy questions up on the screen, as this is should be the focus of our general questions at this time, to kind of gauge where we as council are looking at this program at. This is by no means a final decision that we're making, only a guidance that we're providing. So given that we are at the council comment portion of the meeting, I will be again using the seating chart for each council member. I do ask that you be concise and brief in your comments, as there are, I'm sure, going to be multiple rounds moving forward on this issue. With that, Councilmember Figueroa, do you have any comments or questions regarding the policy direction of this CARES Act funding?
Thank you, Mayor, Councilman Figueroa. And no, I read the report and got briefed, so that was a very good report, Marisa. I believe option one is one that I would lean towards. And as far as policy is, I'm leaning towards more in solely for the businesses. Again, details later, but towards the businesses right now. And really, that's the only two comments I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Figueroa. Councilmember Keel, do you have any comments or questions at this time?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple comments and a few questions. So my first question is, could you define essential government? I mean, I think I know the answer to that, but I want to make sure that I know in this context.
Who are you directing your question at, sir?
The presenters. Oh, I guess Assistant City Manager, Marisa Craig. On your slide where you showed what other cities are doing, you had dots in human services, businesses, and essential government. So, and some people did have essential government, but some didn't. So I'm just trying to figure out what does essential government mean?
Okay, Councilmember Keel, I believe essential government are all those services that basically Eric Faison had talked about. These are the reimbursable pots. Yeah, most of them are doing so. I think a lot of the cities certainly are getting reimbursed. So those are all the staff.
Right. No, that's what I thought, but I want to make sure. I don't want to assume anything. And then the other question I had, and I know the little red thing is not around me, but I'm talking anyway. The other question I had was dealing with the loans. So as I understand, this program is money coming from the Fed through the state to us for that work, and it's like money that should be spent. So if people are making these loans, and I'm not talking about microloans or loans that will be forgiven. I mean, I get that, but are there some people actually giving true loans where they think businesses are going to pay these back to the city? And if they do pay them back, where does that money go? I mean, how? So they're not being paid back. That's a question to Marisa.
Councilmember Keel, no, I think the PPP loans, the idle loans, and certainly even the Pierce County's small business funds that you're talking about, this has to be all COVID-related impacts. So there are basically it's the same criteria you would find consistently throughout. Even on the local level, they basically copied the SBA's criteria level. And so, no, they have to show significant impact from COVID, direct COVID impact to qualify, whether that be having to lay off or furlough employees, loss in revenue because of loss of sales and closure. So it has to be that.
Okay. Okay. Great.
I believe Eric Faison wanted to respond to you also, Councilmember Keel.
Thank you, Councilmember Keel and Mayor. If funds are loaned out, they would have to be paid back within the timeline. So if any monies have to be paid back, we would have to pay. Any money that they pay back has to go back to the U.S. Treasury. So it's not money that we get to keep. Frankly, it seems like I don't fully understand why why a city would adopt the loan program, I guess to protect the U.S. Treasury. But I think the intent of the funds generally was to get the funds out into the community to help both the economy as a whole, as well as individual businesses and residents. So it's not clear to me why anyone would adopt the loan program, but Marisa maybe can speak to that. But it certainly is something that would have to go back to the Treasury.
Great, thank you. I mean, that's the whole purpose of my question is like, wait a minute, it's not our money. You have to go back to the Treasury. So thank you for that. And it looks like Marisa has a comment as well. Go ahead, Marisa.
Actually, Councilmember Keel, they call it a loan or a micro loan, but it's a forgivable loan. So in actuality, it really is sort of a grant. It's just the way they define it. And so, like I said, they're more tilting towards most of them just an outright grant rather than having to administer and go through the whole process of a forgivable loan, zero interest program.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So just the word loan throws me up. It's throwing me off. So I get it now. All right. So just my reaction to the policy piece. I'm definitely in favor of option one. I think this, in my view, still fits under the emergency powers that we gave the city manager to do. And I understand that, you know, all of it didn't fit in. Matt, I hear your voice, Mr. City Attorney, that we got to go through all this stuff. So I get that, but to me, it fits underneath that piece. So if we can do option one, that would be great. Certainly, businesses that are licensed in UP would be important to me. I think focusing on businesses, I think that if there was a way that we could cheer it in a way that we give more preference to businesses that have not received any funding at all whatsoever, that we can maybe, you know, give those a bump up in priority, and as funds are available beyond that level, then those businesses that have received funding from other places, we could also augment that with the funding that we have. But again, trying to make sure that we give some get some relief to people that really need it inside our city. That would be one. And my last comment is that of the 122, I guess, units that Jennifer was talking about, or people that needed some rent or mortgage assistance and stuff like that, it would be nice if we identified anybody that was in that area, that we can do some help with them as well, either through their landlord, you know, and making sure the landlord doesn't kick the people out, you know, that kind of thing, or if there are people that are mortgage holders, if there's some way to make allowances for them too. That would be my preference. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Keel. At this time, Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, do you have any comments or questions?
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, yes, I do. To give the staff just general guidance, I certainly think that the funds ought to be split between businesses and human services. I would throw out the ratio of 65-45. There's no scientific way I came up with that, but it would favor the business at 65. 70-30 business would be fine too. As far as the options go, option two, if a timeline is not important, then option two provides the most transparent and professional way to deal with these funds. But to get the number of participants that we have, it would be required to carry out option two, would make a tight timeline really difficult. So if the timeline isn't as etched in granite as it would appear to be, I would certainly go for option 2. Option 1 is certainly viable. I believe it would be quicker to establish. So if we want to get this program on the road, probably option 2. So I hate to sound like our city attorney and say each one is a good option. I would go option 2 if we had time, and option 1 if the deadline is critical, then option 1. Also, grants, and I thank you for the explanation on what a grant is. I was thinking a loan was a loan, but evidently it's not. The main thing is that we're doing favors for these people. Giving them a loan that they're going to have to pay back doesn't seem to me that we'd be doing them any favors. And also, human services, I think it's a great way to give the money out for human services is to work through organizations that have already been established, such as the Family Unlimited and the CCP. They provide lunches, but of course that's the Catholic Community Service does the lunches. But I think that using organizations, nonprofits that have a established process is a way to most effectively provide this money to the people who need it. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Pro Tem Lee. Councilmember McCluskey, do you have comments or questions at this time?
Yes, I do, Mayor. Thank you. I was, since Councilmember Pro Tem Lee put out the 70-30 ratio that was unscientifically driven and designed, I will go with the 70-30 as well, but a flexible model so that it's not a hard 70-30, so that the majority of the focus would be towards economic resiliency in our city for the businesses that have the intention to come back. A grant disbursement I'm in favor of, because that seems to be the loan that forgivable loan just doesn't make sense with all the paperwork and time that it would be. And since the COVID has dramatically impacted the businesses, I'm sure less paperwork for them would be welcomed to them as well. For the human services, focusing on food and childcare, that helps sustain our citizens throughout this pandemic. I'm also, as Councilmember Keel mentioned, the 122 renters that are facing a hardship. Maybe looking at that once the disbursements have been done to see what we can do on the back end for them, or maybe some assistance with rent and mortgage, utilities in county that have those services already in place for them to access, and they may not know how to access that. For business assistance, all businesses in UP that are not supported by the larger corporations and has had some relief given to them, that is a sustainable relief model for them to remain viable businesses in University Place. And the reason for that is that maybe a little bit more would help them sustain themselves in the business if we had that option to do that. If perchance we didn't have enough applications to fully disperse our funds. And then businesses in UP that have a business license, been around for a year or more, and possibly with a 25% or greater reduction in business revenues, and maybe with 3 to 5 or more employees. I'm not sure what on the model of that, but to help support the smaller businesses as well. And I'd like to include also some home businesses, not only the brick and mortar. I know they have more expenses, but to also maybe consider some of the small businesses with maybe a smaller cap of funding that could help sustain them. I'm leaning towards option 1 as well, because I like to keep things simple, direct, and efficient. And this also, the option 1 also includes our Economic Development Commission, which has fingers into our businesses and could probably bring back some good tools, good ideas, and resources to help guide the guidelines for the disbursement of the funding. I know option 2 seems like a more democratic process, but I don't believe we have the time to do a full vetting and putting together and organizing and gathering and developing virtual meetings for an outcome. That seems too arduous in the state of emergency. And at that time, thank you, Mayor. I'm done with my comments for right now.
Thank you, Councilmember McCluskey. Councilmember Fleming, do you have comments or questions at this time?
I do, Madam Mayor, and thank you for the opportunity to comment. I just want to begin with just saying thank you to Eric and Marisa and Jen for the comments that they made in the presentation. This was, I'm sure, no easy task and certainly very thorough, and I appreciate giving us the options and a lot of stuff just to think about and process as we go through that. No question in anyone's mind that the COVID-19 pandemic has created some unprecedented damage and hardships to our economy, especially in our community with our small businesses and to the citizens that live here. So with this funding that we're receiving as a government, we really do have an opportunity to respond, and as a council, we have an opportunity and an obligation to lead through the process. So looking at it, the 30,000 foot level and the information we have before us, I tend to join Councilmember Lee on the option 2 because it really does get the council front and center and engaged in this process versus deferring it to the city manager to work through there. And it really does create the greatest opportunity for transparency as we work through the process on that. With regards to the microloans and the grants, I appreciate Marisa's comment about the microloans. I too had concerns about, making loans to folks, having them pay it back at a time when they can probably least afford it. And that, I think, answer has been responded to. Back to the policy questions. I'm leaning there on the option for the businesses and human services. In terms of percentage-wise, I don't want to venture a guess on how much it should go one way or the other. I do believe that we should take a hard look at the renters situation. There are a lot of folks right now who are out of work in our community who really could use some help with their rent assistance. They happen to not all live in apartments. Many of those folks live in homes that they rent. So we shouldn't be biased towards servicing just the apartment renters in our community, but look at anyone who has rental obligations and are trying to make those ends meet as we go through that process. Lastly, I think the appearance of transparency and equity is really extremely important to me. And when I look at the amount of funding we have, granted that it is limited, And when I look at the city wanting to carve just a hair under or hair under 50% of that money for the city's use and then leaving 50% of it to the community, I have a real major struggle with that. I believe, you know, we need to look at recouping some of the costs that the city had dealing with the pandemic, but this is an opportunity really to reach out to our small businesses, reach out to the citizens who are in the greatest need right now, and really try to bring some meaningful funding to that portion of the program and maybe relook at what our needs are as a city government. So I would just caution us, and I would certainly have some reservations if we were to say we're taking 50% of this funding and spending it on ourselves as government and leaving 50% for the rest of our community. So just, I toss that out for some food for thought for the council to process. Short of that, with regards to how we should look at it, you know, my final comments, you know, when we look at businesses in our community and trying to determine where do you start, my take would be if a business was licensed and operating in University Place at the time the pandemic emergency began, I think they should be eligible to qualify. Again, ensuring that our businesses here in the community are taken care of first. If a business has been able to go out and get additional funding to keep their doors open virtually for their businesses, I don't think we should be penalizing them for being creative and how they're trying to maintain their finances. You know, but we perhaps could look at something equitable in terms of adjusting percentages of what they would be eligible for, so that we have more dollars to go around for more businesses and more community services and community citizen needs. So that is the summary of my comments. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Fleming. Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, do you have comments or questions at this time?
Mayor Pro Tem Worthington has, well, both. So I have a couple of questions, and maybe that's a good place to start. One of them is with the survey that was done, which was some good, quick work, and I appreciate staff doing that. And the response from our apartment community is at least some indication of where we are.
An emergency alarm.
Yes, we have an Ambler alert going on, and I'll wait for that noise to go away. All right, we're good? Okay. I wanted to ask, is with 122 some folks from the survey showing stress in the rent, do we have any idea about what the monthly rent amount may be? That would give us some indication of what the dollar needs could be. And admittedly, as Councilmember Fleming points out, it doesn't include home rentals. That's a whole different market indeed. But just to get some sense of that. Perhaps Jennifer has some information there?
Yeah, I'm waiting for my red box. Here it is. Okay, thank you. So we sent out a survey to all of our partners, which is, 40 plus property owners and managers within the city, with a short survey that said, if do you have residents how many residents do you have, and how many residents have been affected by COVID and are unable to pay their rent because of COVID. So we received 22 responses. And so we have across the board 22 properties represented that vary in rent. So I would have to pull them additionally, which I could very easily do to find out, what exactly the rent for each of those properties would be, whether that's utility, all of that stuff included.
All right, great. So we can get that information, but don't have it at hand today. It just makes it difficult to have a sense of how much need there is there to get adjusted. It looks like Marisa may have a comment.
Mayor Pro Tem, I don't know if this would help, but as we were going over and looking at the potential of rental assistance. We did, of course, from David's side of the city here, we do know that over 40% of our housing units in UP are rental. And we did come up with an average number of rent. Of course, as Jennifer said, she'll have to go back because each one would be different. But the average rate of rent is about 1,138 in UP.
Great, thank you. That's enough to give us a scale, and that's really what I was trying to get to. Okay, thank you. All right, and then another question that I had was I wanted a clarification between option 1 and option 2. Option 1, is the Economic Development Board involved, or commission, I should say? Are they involved in option 1?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see it in the outline as described. I saw them in option 2.
I can speak to that.
Please, Eric.
Yes, they would be involved as well. The idea is it would be ad hoc. So, you never would have a quorum, but we would have meetings that would involve, less than quorum council member, less than quorum EDC, et cetera.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you. And I appreciate that clarification. That's helpful. So all of that, as I said, both those items help. Just trying to do some quick math on the arrears amount of rent. And it's a significant amount of money there. I think it is a real challenge for us, and moving more to the comment side of things, a real challenge to figure out how to divide the money in many different needed groups in different areas, from our residents who are hurting because of loss of jobs, to our businesses who are on the edge of closing or have closed. Also, loss of jobs, loss of livelihood. It's a challenging set. We aren't going to have enough funds to do everything for all people, of course. We never have and never will. The city has had significant additional cost. I suspect that when we talk about recapturing some of those costs at 400 and some thousand, 490, I think it is, that's not really the full cost that the community is paid through its tax dollars for its city government to cover COVID. It's probably just a fraction of that. And it is good to keep in mind that the city is not repaying itself. It is recapturing its citizens' tax dollars that were committed for a whole other purpose, except for this emergency. As we move forward. So from my side of it, when I look at it and I look at the different options laid out there, I think of option 1, excuse me, not options, policy questions first. When I think of option or policy number 1, which asks businesses or services, I think we should try and do something in each category. I think we do want to help our businesses. I think we want to try and find some way to help in services too. To me, that split looks more like about an 80-20 split, or if we have 500,000 available, 400,000 going towards business and 100,000 going towards services. To me also, it would seem for the way for us to help would be to give experienced local service providers some additional funding to help them deliver services in a system they already know, that doesn't have any new overhead associated with it, that gets money to the people that can use it, in the case of food bank or some other related services. But these are service providers that are very, very UP-centric, not outside the bounds of our city and the service delivery, in my mind. It's grants, and for all the reasons we've all talked about, and it makes good sense, I think, that way. When we think about business eligibility, we've hit on some good things. The way I tend to look at it is they need a 2020 business license, and they need to have had a 2019 business license. They need to have some employees, maybe if the number is 3 or more. And those are the things that stick in my mind. And in terms of other eligibility issues, it's hard for us to really know whether they've had or will get the federal PPP program or some of the other things. So it's hard to know if they will or won't get it. And the data sets just aren't there when we need to make a decision. I think more likely I would look towards the state program that we've had. Some of our businesses, fortunately, have been able to take advantage of. It's a handful, but it's some. We have that data set. It's the magnitude of about a $10,000 grant. And at the end of the day, that's probably about in the magnitude of what we're talking about. And maybe we're looking for some other businesses other than those that have had that 10,000 from the state. The rest of it, though, is helpful if they are in those other programs, but it's hard for us to know, and we should spend our efforts in delivering services, I think, beyond that. Let's see, those are some of the things in my mind. I agree with Councilmember Fleming and Lee and some others that have talked about option 2. I know it takes some time, but it doesn't take that much time. And it gives us a chance to involve our community in some of the minds that we often rely on with the Economic Development Commission and perhaps some others. For example, if I were to do it, I would suggest we look at Cliff Quisenberry, the chair of our Planning Commission, because Cliff has worked through a lot of different issues in our community, knows it well, and he has a strong background in economics. He's a professional economist, for goodness sakes. And if he can help us understand where we can spend a dollar in a business that delivers the types of things we want to make a difference in, Cliff could be very helpful there. I have no idea if he's available. I certainly suspect he would like to help if he can. And but I would add him to the list if we went to option number 2, and lean heavy on our Economic Development Board. I keep saying that, Economic Development Commissioners, who are well-knowledged and well-skilled for us as well. So those are my thoughts, and we can sure talk some more. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. At this time, it's my opportunity to kind of summarize and provide some of my feedback and comments onto this, onto the discussion that we've had this evening. I want to thank all the council members for maintaining the requested decorum and keeping at the high 30,000 foot level on this discussion, because I know we all are passionate about making sure that our community survives through this and comes out stronger at the end. Into having maybe a slight hybrid between option 1 and 2. I understand the timeline that is needed for us to make a decision on this, but I think that I like the idea that Mayor Pro Tem Worthington came up with, and adding Cliff Quisenberry to the list of individuals to provide some insight and expertise that is rather unique for us to have access to. He has an international background of working with distressed businesses, so maybe he can look at this from an angle that none of us have looked at and be able to assist our businesses in revamping themselves through this process with the funding that we get. As far as dividing between business and human service providers, I do know that the county will be instituting an opportunity for renters and mortgage and homeowners to apply for mortgage and renters assistance here within the next week or two. They have received a large allotment of funds for that. But I do think that we should include some aspect of human services in our calculations. What that percentage is, I don't know at this time, because we don't really have a good feel for what the needs are for our current UP business, our human service providers. And I think whatever option we choose for developing a program, that should be in one of the recommendations that the group comes back to us on, so that we are assured that our human services funds are being spent in the most wise and economical manner possible. Possibly the greatest swath of coverage would be to focus in on childcare services, in that all of our, being that we have a percentage of two-member family workers out there, childcare is going to be one of those areas that they are going to be needing as they move back away from working at home and going back to work. I would like to see us definitely address our UP-centric businesses. I'm not adverse to or opposed to home-based businesses being included in that equation. I do think it's very important that they be fully licensed, that they be up to date on payment of all their taxes due to the state. You know, that we have vetted at least from that standpoint. Those that have received funding, I think elsewhere, I'm not against including them in the mix. However, I would like to provide an opportunity for those that have not received any outside funding to maybe receive higher points, so to speak, if we decide to go with a point system and rank them higher. And given the fact that we've had such a large number of new business openings within the last year, most of those businesses may not even qualify for the grant funding opportunities that are out there. So I would not want to exclude those new businesses from an opportunity to maybe provide that little incentive that might get them over the hump and get their doors open once that's allotted. So I want to thank staff for the excellent presentation, going over everything that's involved in this big funding here. And I would like to, at this time, just check and make sure that staff has understood all the comments that they have received from the council, and if they understand next steps moving forward. So with that, I will turn it over to Marisa Craig and see if she can summarize what staff has heard at this point.
Mayor, just one quick comment. I don't know if this would be useful, as there were a lot of comments about the splitting of human services and business. One of the things that I wanted to add as you start thinking about this as well, we've had the opportunity to talk to some of the service providers, and actually it was very surprising, and I think it echoes some of your comments regarding some more monies that's being appropriated perhaps by the county to mortgage and rental assistance. What we found and what they've told us is there in fact are a lot of resources out there, because a lot of the cities too, if you can imagine, are thinking along the same line. So they're expecting more resources coming. It's not so much that there aren't resources, it's all of a sudden the barrage of people wanting the service, and the time frame for distribution is causing a little bit of a challenge for them in terms of the distribution, and even for the ones, let's say, already doing rental assistance, they don't have the infrastructure in terms of staffing, and so that is part of the challenge. For some of the food banks, they said, yeah, there's a lot of resource and money out there to provide. It's the distribution of the food that's a challenge. So I don't know if we could solve that, but I just thought I would leave that with you. I took some very good notes, Mayor, in terms of what each council member wants. I didn't quite count whether it's option 1 or option 2. I know you were a hybrid, but I think we'll figure it out and come back to you guys. I know we have 2 of our economic development commissioners listening in, so they know and very aware that their assistance is going to be needed quite a bit, and they're very willing to do that, whether it's option 1 or option 2. They're ready and prepared to do that. We will make an invitation to Commissioner Quisenberry if he has time. Maybe he has now because he has to be home, and he seems to be liking virtual meetings, is what I heard. So I think we're gonna go ahead and do that. I don't know, Eric, do we want to talk about timing wise with either ones? You want to summarize the timing, perhaps?
Mr. Faison, I believe you are next.
Yes, I'm waiting for the box. I can just start speaking if you'd like me to go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I too have been taking great notes, and we do need more direction on the option. Right now, I have it 3-3, and then the mayor 1 in terms of the vote tally. And so because option 2 would require a resolution that would create the commission or the committee to come back to council, I need to know if we're doing that or not. I also could say that I can assure you that we will be including Cliff in with this discussion, with regardless which option you guys choose. So I think he is a good resource and certainly someone we would want to be engaged with.
Well, given that I'm the more or less deciding factor on this, as much as I would like to go with option 2, because I feel it offers the most transparency in this process. The fact that we have to go through resolutions and all this other background work, and I know how difficult it is to get cameras going and virtual meetings going, as long as staff can assure us, the council, that we are all going to be involved in this process, even though it's not in a majority format, and that we will continue to involve our commission members, including Mr. Quisenberry, in this process, as well as our businesses, doing outreach to businesses and landlords, etc. I can defer to going to option number 1, and if need be, extending the timeline on it to ensure that we do a very thorough outreach and a very thorough process with the community as a whole as we move forward. So that is my deciding comment on that particular issue. Okay. So at this time, this is not the end of the conversation by any stretch of the imagination. We will still be having individual comments about this as we move forward. It will also be brought forward to council for another study session and then a final decision on that process, on the final process moving forward. So there's still opportunity as you think this thing through and as you deal with your constituents to add questions and excuse me, comments as we move forward. Okay, but given the lateness of the hour and the fact that we still have 2 items on our agenda this evening, I am going to close this portion of this study session at this time, since I did not see anybody having any additional urgent questions to be asked. So with that, our next item involves a legislative proposal that was submitted by Councilmember Figueroa and Councilmember McCluskey, and that has to do with AWC's involvement in the I-96 litigation. I will call on Councilmember Figueroa first for his comments and input, and then Councilmember McCluskey to add to that, and then any council member will go through the seating chart if any council members have any questions moving forward. So Councilmember Figueroa, this is your show.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Figueroa here, and this legislative proposal, though it might be dated somewhat because of when I made the request, but so much has happened with this COVID pandemic issues that this has been delayed, but it's not dated in a sense that I still want to address and get the council to support a letter opposing a formal letter from our city to AWC board opposing the use, not just for that one time the litigation that they went to court on that one issue on I-976, but also for any future litigation they may think they may want to take to court because something fails that the voters approved through the initiative. And I think that our fees that go into AWC, which is substantial, is going for some very specific purposes. And I understand that there is a committee that actually deals with legislative proposals and deals with lobbying the legislators up in the Capitol Hill for city issues. I don't believe that they have any due process for taking an issue to court and joining a court litigation with some other parties. And I believe that should have been better handled. There should be a process that we all would agree. But I certainly do not agree that they should be using our fees, our membership fees, for that purpose. And I'd like to and I'm asking for support to put together a letter on behalf of this council as to our dissatisfaction and how they utilized our fees, our membership fees for that purpose, and that to request that they do not do that in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember McCluskey.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. I'll tag team on back of Councilmember Figueroa. And I was very disenchanted that we used some of the AWC fundings to go into the court litigation, which is probably a moot point right now because it's gone through the court. But to send a message to the AWC that when they're doing a litigation that has a direct counterpoint to what the citizens and the voters had by a strong majority of vote wanted to repeal, then I would like the city and the city council to be part of that discussion and to send their findings to the AWC. But I believe the AWC has value, and I'm still in support of the AWC wholeheartedly. However, and this could be an anomaly, but to send them a message that if the voters are in tune to not repealing something, that we need to not, because since we represent the citizens, we need to take into that account going into any lawsuit or litigation. And this is the intent to other agencies as well that use their influence in ways that preclude local control and direction.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember McCluskey. Given that Councilmember Figueroa is first on the seating chart and has already spoken, I will go to the next person on the list, and that is Councilmember Keel. Do you have any comments at this time?
Well, thank you, Mayor. You know, my first inclination was to say, no, I don't have anything to say at all. Yeah, that's not going to be the case. So the first thing I want to say is just for full disclosure, I think you all know, but just to get it as a matter of record, I want to share with everyone that I am currently the secretary of AWC. I'm the incoming vice president of that association, and I am the president-elect of that association. So I'm in a leadership position online to be the leader of the organization here in about 18 months. So I just want to say that to all of you, to everyone on the call. And I've talked with Matt Kaiser, and I've looked at everything. And so it is okay for me to be engaged in this conversation, even though I happen to be an officer of the organization that we're talking about. So if there's no objection from anyone on the council, then I will proceed in this thing. Okay, great. So just give you some background of the process. I think it would be important to share with you how AWC got to where it is on this topic, because I'll tell you, I was in the room, in the conversation, every step of the way. Okay, so the board met when all this came about, and we talked about, you know, how should, and I'm talking about the full big board, the 25-member board met, and we started talking about how AWC should participate if, you know, in 976. And there was a bunch of discussion back and forth about not being a plaintiff, writing an amicus brief, which is what we normally do when there's controversial things, where we just, it's called being a friend of the court, where we just provide facts about stuff, both on both sides of the aisle, just give them the facts. Long discussion, no agreement. And we got to the end of that, and without an agreement, so the board decided to say, well, let's give this to the executive committee and let them take it further and decide. The executive committee is secretary, vice president, president, and then 2 past presidents, and then a representative from the large cities. And so we met at the airport on some day, and we talked a lot about it. I can tell you that my input into that executive committee discussion was that we should not be a plaintiff in this organization because probably all the reasons that the people that are bringing it up. I just felt because the voters voted for it, and I just didn't feel that it was something that AWC should do. And I said at the very most, we should probably just write an amicus brief and provide the facts. Long discussion. We ended up voting. Now, the best way I can couch it is that I abstained from the vote. I didn't vote yes, I didn't vote no, and I didn't have an opportunity to provide an abstention. I just kept my mouth shut because I wasn't very happy at that moment. So I didn't say anything. The minutes to that meeting comes out that it was a unanimous vote by the executive committee. When I saw that, I called and I gave them my stance of where I was. And my last reading of those minutes, they still show that that it's unanimous. And so I have a little bit of pushback with AWC staff on getting those records corrected. So anyway, the vote did pass through the executive committee and to be a plaintiff, and they went forward that way. So my last comment is that although we may not agree, and although I didn't agree that we should have been a plaintiff, I think that the organization followed its process to get to a direction. And it was talked about, it was vetted, it was put before the body, the elected bodies, the board, who represents all of the 281 cities and towns. And they followed the process, and we ended up voting, and the vote carried the way to be a part of the plaintiffs. And I, as an officer of that organization, although I was outvoted, being a part of that organization and being an officer, I'm bound to do what the organization says. And so that's where we're going, and that's my position. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Keel. Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, do you have comments or questions at this time?
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, yes, I do. I want to thank Councilmember Keel for sharing his insight as to what happened. I'm not pleased with the way that it worked out, but with respect to AWC, I believe that they have done this for the greater good of our state and our cities. They provide a lot of services for our cities, not to mention lobbying, the education, the insurance provided the cities. So I don't like the way that it turned out. But as far as my feeling is that they did what they did, and it's probably for the greater good of the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Pro Tem Lee. Councilmember McCluskey, I will be bypassing you since you spoke earlier and move on to Councilmember Fleming. Do you have comments or questions? You're on, sir.
All right. Thank you, Madam Mayor. You know, first and foremost, I want to thank Councilmember Keel for that background. I think the history behind what transpired at AWC is truly significant, and appreciate that, the setting the stage for that. You know, where I tend to fall on these type of things has to do with who we are as a state. You know, and Washington State is one of 10 populous states in the country, which basically through the Constitution says the ultimate power to make and repeal law rests with the people and not with government. And, you know, that's why we have the opportunity for initiatives and referendums. And then as electeds, we have an obligation to listen to the voice of the people. So while I appreciate what AWC has done, I feel, on the other hand, the people of our state and of our community spoke loud and clear with the initiative. So I, you know, personally appreciate the comments of both Councilmember Figueroa and Councilmember McCluskey. Sorry about that, Denise. And bringing this initiative before the council. I certainly support what you're doing and would be happy to endorse that. So that's where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, do you have comments or questions at this time? You are muted, sir.
Thank you. And yes, I was saying Mayor Pro Tem Worthington does have a comment. To me, large and somewhat effective organizations like AWC, they're going to have some conflicts between the various interests of their membership. And it takes a keen sense of process and following the rules to be able to navigate that. And the short story is, I think they did navigate that. I don't like the outcome either. I can recall another time I didn't like the outcome with AWC. It was about something called streamlined sales tax. And it had divided the association, probably 15 years ago. And the city I was associated with at the time was a loser, as it was referred to. And this city that I'm in now was one of the strong advocates that made my other city a loser. I was upset because it cost our city that I was in a lot of money. But I respected the organization's decision. And I ultimately said, okay, you know, it's the organization, it's where they want to go. And at the end of the day, they do good things. That's kind of where I'm at today. I don't like the direction. I don't believe, though, that it was done improperly. And it happens when you're in an association. It does come down to being some process that is fair, understandable, and that decides on what is the greater good. So that's, from my perspective, I believe the process was followed as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. As the final commenter on this, AWC represents 281 municipal organizations. They represent government. Their task is not to represent the people. And as much as I appreciate that the people had a say in this I-976, it had a detrimental impact on 281 jurisdictions in their budgets. And that is what AWC was representing when they went for the lawsuit. And so therefore, we pay those dues for them to represent us before the legislators. We as citizens have a right to make our own representation. We did when we did the I-976 initiative and passed it. It is our duty as city council members to uphold the I-976 outcome that our citizens demanded. But AWC needs to look at it from the other perspective. Again, when you are part of an organization that you're paying dues to, you're not always going to like the decisions that the organization comes forward with. But I just have to remind myself that they are representing government. They are not representing the citizens of this community, and they have an elected board that represents the 281 governments. So there, I'm sure, was loud conversation going on back and forth between the various representatives and the impacts that decision had moving forward. And I have to trust, like I do our federal legislators and our state legislators, that they are making the best representation of a situation. So as much as I agree with the votes of our citizens, I cannot support submitting a letter to AWC at this time, advocating against something that we are paying dues for them to advocate on our behalf. So at this time, I did not hear a consensus of support for a letter, but I will give Councilmember Figueroa another opportunity and Councilmember McCluskey an opportunity to hear or reiterate what we had, and then we will go through.
Yes, Mayor.
Yeah.
Excuse me for interrupting, but it's time. We're going to need to extend. I think we've reached our.
Yes, thank you for keeping up. I have a motion to extend. I am assuming, based on the fact that we have another item on the agenda, that we're looking at extending till 9:30. Do I have a second at this time?
Second.
Okay, I have a first and a second.
This is Councilmember Keel.
Do I hear any objections? Not hearing any, motion carries. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Figueroa for his response to what he has heard from his fellow council members this evening. You are muted, sir. Councilmember Figueroa, please unmute yourself.
Okay, here we go. Thank you, Mayor. So let me see if I was following you quite well. And we represent the people. AWC, all due respect, you said represents government. They represent us as cities. Remember who they represent, us as cities. And I could care less about, I shouldn't say that. It's not about every other city, because we're talking about our city in this council, who I'm making this request to, and that is, we pay $24,000 a year to represent us as our city and what our wishes are. And our wishes, I thought I heard clearly from you, is that we as council members are obligated to uphold the citizens' initiatives. So by that virtue, by default, that should be represented in AWCs and how they represent us or any other city, if your comment is true. On another point is what I heard from Howard and Councilmember Worthington was that they thought that the process was fine and there was no misgivings. What I didn't hear, I heard though from both of them that though it wasn't right, the initiative, how they represent, I don't want to quote you guys, but I didn't hear a very clear definition that you wouldn't support a letter. You were just stating, okay, it seems like the board followed a process and they're a great organization. That's not my issue here, that they're not a great organization. And I do disagree that maybe the process was really wasn't done, but that's not my issue. My issue and the request here is to send them a letter opposing them to take, and I'm talking about in some of your comments, by the way, I forget who it was Mr. Worthington's, was about how monies were spent on that one 15 years ago. I don't think they went to court and spend monies going to court. Okay, that's different. Number one. Number two, they didn't do that on a people's initiative. And this is all about two things. One is going against the people's initiative, which is what we represent, and they represent us. I don't know how clearly how you can misconstrue that. And number two is they should definitely not be spending money and going to court as a plaintiff to fight any people's initiative that we're supposed to be standing up for. Thank you.
Councilmember McCluskey.
All right, thank you. I'm not going to reiterate what Councilmember Figueroa has just stated, because that's the crust of all of this. It's the people's initiative, and AWC represents not only cities but elected officials that are supposed to represent the citizens and support their directions. And that all comes into how we do city government, city policies, and to also retain local control. And so this is a big deal to me, because we have if it is upheld by the court, we get to decide as a city whether to expend the TBD funding or not. Go to the direction of the court if they uphold it, or for the citizens' initiative and the referendum and all the efforts and the grassroots organization that it took to get this on the ballot was huge. I don't think we should just take that in a very cavalier manner that AWC is government. It's us, elected officials, that are responsible and accountable to our citizens, and at the end of the day, we get to be reelected. AWC president, vice president, you know, they probably don't. But anyway, that's all I'm going to state on that. And I think we have a very important question for our city to handle if it is upheld by the courts, and how, if we're going to sustain our TBD funding outside of that. So anyway, take care.
Okay, at this time, are there any other council members that would want to speak? Okay, I'll go through the list again. Councilmember Keel.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to underscore again that you know, we did go through the process as I had mentioned, and that was my argument in the room, is that it represented people, and I also feel strongly that AWC should represent us as council members, and where things are controversial, like this topic, I think that is something that they should have stayed out of. And my last comment is that I don't intend, just like I didn't vote at that meeting, I don't intend, if we were to take a vote, I don't intend to vote here as well. I'm going to abstain.
Okay. Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, do you have any additional comments, or did you change your mind?
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, after thinking this over, I agree with that the process was by the AWC, I think was probably correct. I also feel that AWC helps our cities in a lot of different ways, like I said, through insurance, education, lobbying, so forth. However, if it will make our citizens feel better by us sending this letter to AWC and make them feel that that we are standing up for them, I say that I will support the letter. Thank you.
Councilmember Fleming.
Let's see if I get this right. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I actually can find the buttons now. This is awesome. You know, I appreciate this is a great debate, really, on both sides of the issue. And I don't think by any stretch of the imagination, AWC is a very worthy organization that on behalf of cities does great things. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. I think the question before us, though, is not as electeds here tonight, should we be following the lead of AWC, but as electeds, are we truly representing the constituency of our community that voted on this already? We represent the people, not a body of electeds that are acting collectively on behalf of the goodness of our cities. I think in this particular conversation, Councilmember Figueroa and McCluskey have very, very well articulated the issue before us and the need for us to support the letter. I don't think by forwarding the letter, we are disparaging the work that AWC does. We're simply reflecting the sentiment of the people that we represent in this city. And so for me, my opinion hasn't changed. I think it's important to forward this letter on to AWC and, you know, just saying, hey, what y'all are doing collectively as an organization is great, but on behalf of our citizens in our community, we just disagree with this direction. It's okay sometimes to disagree with a body that we belong to, especially when it comes to representing the voice of the people. We are, you know, each and every one of us are the voice of the people in our community. And so I, again, feel that what you have brought forward to the council, to my fellow council members, I think it's appropriate, and I think it's something that we should do. And so my position in terms of do I support the letter or not has not changed. So thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Worthington.
Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, and I do have a comment. So as I mentioned earlier, I think the process was a good process that they followed. And I think it was done as it needed to be, and you need the process in the organizations. So council members McCluskey and Figueroa, good arguments. I do think you turn the issue on a key piece, and that is the question about going into court and as a plaintiff. And it's an important distinction. And I do think in this particular case, yeah, I'll support the letter.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I would agree to support a letter as long as we address it in a citizen-generated initiative process, as opposed to identifying the I-976. If we address the letter stating that in the future, moving forward with citizen-generated initiatives, that we would request that the AWC take a neutral stance on the issue and not be a participant in any lawsuit in that manner. I think that's the crux of the issue, is their participation as a legal issue. What we will do is staff has been listening in on this conversation and our ideas, and I will ask them to draft a letter, and before that letter is generated, we will all have an opportunity to review it and provide some input. Does that sound good? Do I have thumbs up? Okay. All right. So moving forward, our next thing is another legislative proposal regarding our purchasing policy. Our proponent is Councilmember Figueroa, with Councilmember Keel as the second on it. So with that, I will turn it over to Councilmember Figueroa for your brief summary of what it is you're talking about, just given the lateness of the hour here. So, Councilmember Figueroa.
Thank you, Mayor. It's very simple. I want for us as council to have a very explicit, clear message in our policies that businesses in UP should be given priority in when the city does purchases or services that can be obtained reasonably. Obviously, you can be. I'm not asking to do it in such a way that UP businesses can charge twice the amount, but all I'm saying that everything being equal, if it's from UP, it should be from UP. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Keel, your comments, please.
Great. Great. Thank you, Mayor. Waiting for the red box. Before I make my comment about this, I just want to one last statement on the last topic, and that is I want to make sure the record reflects that I did not vote, I abstained, and that I did not put a thumbs up on the thumbs up. Okay, I don't want to have a repeat of what. Okay, I talked, but I didn't vote. Okay, great, thank you. So on this topic, to me, it's one of those things where we talk about economic development and wanting to really support businesses in UP and all that stuff. And as we were thinking about this, I kept seeing all these contracts going to, companies that are in the next biggest town over, or even into UP South. And I'm like, when I know we have the same kind of companies within UP, and I struggle with that as a scenario. And if we're going to say, and I know that when I worked in Tacoma, I know, and I did contracts in Tacoma, I know for a fact we gave benefit to companies that were in Tacoma. It was part of the rule, and so it just flabbergasts me that we don't do that here, and kind of makes me a little bit angry. And so I would really hope that this council would support, something, and not being illegal and all that other stuff, but from a legal standpoint, that we give preference to those companies that are in UP. Thanks.
Okay. With that, we're on to council comments. The next on the list would be Councilmember Pro Tem Lee. Do you have any quick comments on this issue, please?
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, yes. In the interest of clarity, I say yes. I support it. Thank you.
Councilmember McCluskey, we are not voting, but your direction would be greatly appreciated.
I would be in support of the purchasing policy to also include, not only if the UP business is equal, to give it to University Place, but if they're a viable business in UP, to maybe give them an extra couple points. If that's legal or not, I guess we have to pass that one off through Mr. Kaiser, but also to look at the aspect, even if it's a University Place business, what's the best value for our citizens? And it, may not always be, based on dollar signs, but it may be just to help growth with our economic viability within our city. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Fleming.
All right, let's find my buttons. Okay.
You're on.
This is awesome. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I absolutely endorse anything that promotes the small businesses in our city, because at the end of the day, it really promotes the economic vitality and the viability of our community. So this is one of those what I call no-brainers. I know from a historical perspective, we once started out promoting our businesses in our community and giving them the opportunities when those arose. I don't know over time how that faded away, but it sounds like we're getting a train that's a little off the track back on the track. So to the sponsors of this legislation, I commend you, and I'd say let's move forward. 2 thumbs up on it.
Mayor Pro Tem Worthington.
Mayor Pro Tem Worthington and I'd comment as well. So it's certainly I'm interested in helping our UP businesses be successful, that they get return on their corporate citizenship in our community, and that it can come back to them in any legal way. With that in mind, I'm interested in seeing this item move forward onto our agenda. The city attorney can explain the processes and what's available, what that does for us. Look forward to seeing it in the near future.
Okay. Thank you. And it sounds like, just based on the comments, that we have a next item for a future study session. So I will ask staff to prepare whatever documents are needed for us to move this issue forward for a future study session. And the Mayor Pro Tem and I will look at when we can get that on the agenda. And I want to thank both Council members Figueroa and McCluskey for bringing this issue forward in the form of a legislative proposal. So given that we will be discussing this at a future study session, I don't think that we need to spend any more time on additional comments and questions from council. I think staff has received enough information at this point to be able to move this forward. So with that, I will effectively call this meeting adjourned this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Way to go, Kent.
Mayor.